The warning had been etched into every galactic database for over 3,000 years. Written in 17 different languages, encoded in quantum crystals, and burned into the collective memory of every spacefaring civilization. The message was simple yet absolute. Sol, 3 quarantine zone. Entry forbidden. The sleeping species must not be disturbed. Ambassador Vexthera of the Zephyrian Collective stared at the ancient warning as her sleek vessel drifted at the edge of the Sol system. Her elongated fingers traced the holographic text floating before her, each word glowing with an ominous red light that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. The irony wasn't lost on her that she, a member of one of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations, was about to violate the most sacred law in known space. "My lady," came the nervous voice of Captain Ziltok from behind her. The insectoid officer's mandibles clicked anxiously as he spoke. The Council's orders were explicit. We are to observe only. No contact protocols are to be initiated under any circumstances. Vexthera turned her graceful form to face the captain, her silver skin reflecting the dim bridge lighting. The Zephyrians had evolved from an aquatic species, and their fluid movements still carried the elegance of their oceanic ancestors. Her large, opalescent eyes fixed on Ziltok with the kind of intensity that had made her one of the youngest ambassadors in Galactic Council history. "The Council's orders," she said, her voice carrying the musical quality that made Zephyrian diplomats so effective, were given based on fear and superstition. "We are scientists, Captain. We seek knowledge, not shadows." The bridge fell silent except for the gentle hum of the ship's quantum drives. The crew, a mix of species from across the galaxy, exchanged worried glances. Everyone knew the stories. Every child in every civilization learned about the sleeping giants of Sol. 3, though most dismissed them as cautionary tales meant to keep young mind from wandering too far into dangerous space. But Vexthera had spent years studying the fragmented records, piecing together the truth from ancient archives that most scholars avoided. The humans of Earth hadn't been quarantined because they were dangerous in their current state. They had been contained because of what they might become if awakened from their self-imposed technological hibernation. 3 millennia ago, humanity had been on the verge of joining the galactic community. Their primitive faster-than-light drives had carried their first exploratory vessels to nearby star systems, where they encountered the established order of the Galactic Council. What happened next had become legend, though the details varied depending on who told the story. Some claimed the humans had been welcomed with open arms, only to reveal a terrifying capacity for warfare that dwarfed anything the peaceful galaxy had ever seen. Others whispered that the Council had attempted to subjugate the newcomers, treating them as primitive beings fit only for servitude. The truth, as Vexthera had discovered through years of research, was far more complex and infinitely more frightening. The humans hadn't been conquered or driven away. They had simply stopped. One day, their ships ceased arriving at Council stations. Their communications went silent. Their colonies were abandoned. When concerned Council scouts investigated, they found every human settlement deserted, though clearly evacuated in an orderly fashion. The humans had retreated to their homeworld and seemingly vanished from galactic affairs overnight. The final message from Earth had been brief. "We choose to sleep until the galaxy is ready for us. Do not wake us. You will not survive what follows." That had been 3,000 years ago. Since then, Earth had remained silent, a blue-green jewel hanging in space like a beautiful trap. Automated defense systems of unknown origin prevented any ship from approaching too closely, though they never fired unless directly threatened. The planet simply existed in its bubble of isolation, tempting and terrifying in equal measure. Now, as the Zephyrian survey vessel whispered, tide hung at the system's edge, Vexthera felt the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. The galaxy had changed dramatically since humanity's withdrawal. The Galactic Council had expanded to encompass over 2,000 member species, creating a vast network of trade, diplomacy, and scientific cooperation that spanned half the known galaxy. But it was also a galaxy at war. The Devourers had emerged from dark space 5 years ago, a nightmarish collective of cybernetic beings that consumed entire worlds, converting all biological matter into components for their ever-expanding fleets. They moved through space like a plague, leaving behind only stripped worlds and the screams of the dying transmitted across subspace channels. Traditional council tactics had proven useless. The Devourers adapted to every strategy, learned from every defeat, and grew stronger with each world they consumed. Billions had already died, and projections suggested that the Council's defensive lines would collapse within the next 2 years. Desperation had led to the unthinkable. Someone had suggested waking humanity. The proposal had been met with horror by the Council's elder races. The ethereal concordant, whose crystalline forms existed partially outside normal space-time, had actually manifested physical avatars to vote against the measure, something they hadn't done in over a millennium. The ancient keepers of memory had shared visions of possible futures so terrifying that 3 council members had suffered complete psychological breaks. But the war continued to go badly, and fear of extinction had a way of overriding even the deepest taboos. Vextera had volunteered for the mission not out of desperation, but out of curiosity. Her species had always been explorers at heart, and the mystery of humanity called to her like a siren song. What could possibly be so dangerous about a species that had chosen isolation over expansion? What secrets lay hidden on the 3rd planet of an unremarkable yellow star? Beginning deep space scans, reported Lieutenant Kesare from the sensor station. The Centaurian's 4 arms moved gracefully across her control surfaces, each manipulator handling different aspects of the ship's sophisticated scanning arrays. Passive sensors only, as ordered. The view screen flickered to life, displaying a real-time image of the Sol system. 8 planets orbited the central star, with Earth hanging like a blue marble in the habitable zone. Even from this distance, they could see the geometric patterns of massive orbital installations surrounding the planet, clearly artificial, but of completely unknown design. Those structures, whispered Chief Science Officer Moldrak, his reptilian features creased with concentration. Perhaps we should reconsider. The readings we're getting, they don't match any known technology. Not even theoretical frameworks from our most advanced research stations. Vextera studied the display for a long moment. The orbital structures were beautiful in their own way, following design principles that seemed to blend function and artistry in ways that shouldn't have been possible with conventional engineering. They pulsed with gentle light, creating patterns that somehow seemed both random and purposeful. Have we detected any response to our presence? She asked. Negative, replied Kesare. No targeting systems activating, no communication attempts. As far as we can tell, they haven't even noticed us. That, somehow, was even more unsettling. Any civilization capable of building those installations should have sensor networks that could detect a ship at their current distance. The fact that humanity seemed completely unaware of their presence suggested either complete indifference or confidence so absolute that a potential threat didn't even register as worth noticing. Vextera made her decision. Take us deeper into the system, she ordered, ignoring the sharp intake of breath from several bridge officers. I want detailed scans of those orbital installations. If we're going to report back to the Council, we need actual intelligence, not ancient superstitions. Ambassador, Ziltok's voice carried a note of desperation. The quarantine protocols exist for a reason. Every simulation, every analysis, every prophetic vision from the Council's seers has warned against this exact course of action. And every one of those warnings is based on incomplete information, Vextera countered. We know humanity withdrew from galactic affairs. We know they built impressive defenses. But we don't know why, and we don't know what they become in 3,000 years. The galaxy is dying, Captain. If there's even a chance that humanity could help us against the Devourers, don't we owe it to every living being in the galaxy to find out? The logic was sound, even if the wisdom was questionable. Ziltok's mandibles clicked once more. Then, he turned to issue the necessary orders. The whispered tide began its descent into the Sol system, each kilometer bringing them closer to answers that the galaxy had feared to seek for millennia. As they approached, more details became visible. The orbital installations weren't just defensive platforms, they were cities. Massive, beautiful cities that hung in space like jewels, connected by streams of light that pulsed with constant traffic. The human population hadn't declined during their isolation. It had exploded. Billions of lights twinkled across the installations, suggesting a civilization that had not only survived but flourished in their self-imposed exile. I'm detecting movement, Kesare reported, her voice tight with concentration. Lots of it. Those light streams, they're ships. Thousands of them. The view screen shifted to show the traffic patterns around Earth. Ships of every conceivable size and design moved between the orbital installations in carefully choreographed patterns. Some were clearly cargo vessels, their hulls gleaming with the distinctive blue-white of quantum containment fields. Others defied easy classification, their sleek forms suggesting purposes that the Galactic Council had never imagined. "They're not hiding," Moldrak observed. "This isn't a civilization in decline. This is a thriving interplanetary society that's chosen to limit itself to a single star system." "But why?" Vexteron murmured, more to herself than to her crew. "Why choose limitation when you could have a galaxy?" The answer came sooner than expected. A new contact appeared on their sensors, approaching from the direction of Earth at a speed that should have been impossible. The ship, if it was a ship, moved without visible propulsion, sliding through space as if the normal laws of physics were merely suggestions to be politely ignored. "Contact closing fast," Kesare reported, her forearms dancing across her controls as she tried to analyze the approaching vessel. No engine signatures, no energy readings. It's as if it's not really there. The ship resolved into view as it drew closer, and Vexteron felt her breath catch in her throat. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure, its hull seeming to shift between states of matter as she watched. One moment it appeared to be made of some crystalline substance that caught and reflected light in impossible ways. The next, it seemed to be composed of liquid metal that flowed like water while maintaining its shape. "Incoming transmission," the communications officer announced, his voice barely steady. On screen, the view screen flickered, and suddenly they were looking at a human face. Vexteron had seen images of humans in the ancient archives, but those had been crude recordings from their primitive era. This was something altogether different. The human appeared to be middle-aged by their species standards, with silver hair and eyes that seemed to hold depths that went beyond mere biological sight. When he smiled, it was with a kind of warmth that spoke of genuine pleasure at seeing old friends. "Greetings, travelers," the human said, his voice carrying easily across the communication channel. "I'm Admiral Marcus Chun of the Earth Defense Coordination. We've been expecting you." Vexteron found her voice after a moment of stunned silence. "Expecting us? Of course. The galaxy is at war, and desperate times call for desperate measures. We've been monitoring the situation for quite some time now." Chen's expression grew serious. "The question isn't whether you would come to us eventually. It was simply a matter of when. And who? You know about the Devourers?" "We know about many things, Ambassador Vexteron of the Zephyrian Collective. We know about the 13 different defensive strategies the Council has attempted. We know about the projected casualty figures. We know about the evacuation plans being drawn up for the core worlds." Chen leaned forward slightly. "What we don't know is whether the galaxy has finally learned enough to handle what we've become." The implications hit Vexteron like a physical blow. "You've been watching. All this time you've been watching the galaxy burn, and you've done nothing." "We warned you," Chen replied, his tone remaining maddeningly calm. 3,000 years ago, we told you exactly what would happen if you woke us before you were ready. The question is, are you ready now?" Before Vexteron could respond, Moldrak's voice cut through the tension. "Admiral Chun, our scans indicate that your energy output alone exceeds anything in our databases. What have you done with this system?" Chen's smile returned, but this time it carried an edge that made Vexteron's skin crawl. "We've had 3,000 years to think, Doctor. 3,000 years to prepare. 3,000 years to decide what kind of galaxy we wanted to help create when the time finally came." He paused, and for a moment his eyes seemed to look right through the screen and into each of their souls. "The Devourers are not the first threat the galaxy has faced, and they won't be the last. But they are the first that has been significant enough to warrant our attention." "Significant enough?" Vexteron couldn't keep the outrage from her voice. "Billions have died. Trillions died in the last war of expansion," Chen replied coldly. "Quadrillions died in the war of the singing spheres before that. The galaxy has always been at war, Ambassador. The only difference is the scale and the participants." Vexteron felt the pieces clicking together in her mind, and the picture they formed was terrifying. "You've been planning this. The withdrawal, the isolation, the waiting. You've been planning for this moment since you first made contact with the galaxy." "We've been planning for many moments," Chen corrected. "This is simply one of them. The question now is whether you're prepared to accept what comes next. Because once we act, there will be no going back." The galaxy you knew will cease to exist. And what will replace it? Chen's expression softened slightly, and for a moment Vexthera caught a glimpse of something that might have been compassion. Something better. Something worthy of the potential we saw in all of you 3,000 years ago. But first, the Devourers need to be reminded that they are not the apex predators they believe themselves to be. The communication ended, leaving the bridge of the Whispered Tide in stunned silence. Around them, space began to change as more human ships appeared, materializing from nowhere like ghosts becoming solid. Each vessel was different, following design principles that seemed to mock the very concept of consistent engineering. Some appear to be grown rather than built, their organic curves suggesting living technology. Others looked like they had been carved from single pieces of some impossible material, their surfaces reflecting light that shouldn't have existed. "My lady," Ziltok's voice was barely a whisper. "What have we done?" Vexthera stared at the growing fleet surrounding them, each ship representing technology that was centuries or possibly millennia beyond anything the Galactic Council possessed. The humans hadn't been sleeping for 3,000 years. They had been evolving, preparing, becoming something that the galaxy wasn't ready to comprehend, much less confront. "We've awakened gods," she said finally, "and now we get to see what they do with a galaxy that disappointed them." As if responding to her words, the human fleet began to move, not toward the edge of the system, but deeper into it, toward installations that were only now becoming visible as they dropped their concealment fields. What Vexthera had taken for orbital cities were just the surface layer. Beneath them, hidden in dimensions that our instruments couldn't properly measure, lay the true scope of humanity's transformation. They hadn't been quarantined to protect the galaxy from them. They had been quarantined to protect them from a galaxy that wasn't worthy of what they could become. Now, ready or not, it was time for the galaxy to meet its new shepherds. And somewhere in the vast darkness between the stars, the Devourers continued their relentless advance, unaware that their perfect war was about to meet an imperfect peace that would reshape everything they thought they understood about power, victory, and survival. Admiral Marcus Chun materialized on the bridge of the Whispered Tide without warning, his form solidifying from particles of light that seemed to bend reality around them. The security protocols that should have prevented unauthorized transport simply didn't activate, as if the very concept of unauthorized access was meaningless when applied to human technology. Vexthera's hand moved instinctively toward the ceremonial weapon at her side before stopping. What was the point? If the humans could transport their personnel through shields that had never failed before, what could a simple energy blade accomplish? "Fascinating ship," Chin said conversationally, as if appearing uninvited on alien vessels was perfectly normal behavior. He moved with the fluid grace of someone completely comfortable in any environment, his eyes taking in the bridge's design with obvious appreciation. Zephyrian bioarchitectural principles merged with Centaurian computational systems. Very elegant. Though I notice you're still using quantum tunneling for faster-than-light communication. We found that approach rather limiting. Captain Ziltok's mandibles clicked rapidly, the insectoid equivalent of hyperventilation. How did you transport through your shields?" Chun smiled, and the expression somehow managed to be both reassuring and terrifying. "The same way water flows around rocks, Captain. Your defenses are impressive for what they're designed to stop. Unfortunately, what they're designed to stop is 3,000 years out of date." Moldrak stepped forward, his scales shifting to the deep purple that indicated intense curiosity overriding fear. "Admiral Chun, with respect, our shielding technology incorporates defensive principles from over 50 different civilizations. Some of those principles are theoretical physics that haven't been successfully implemented by any known species." "Known to whom?" Chun asked. "The Galactic Council? The same organization that's been fighting a losing war against an enemy they fundamentally don't understand." He moved to one of the bridge stations, not touching any controls, but somehow causing the displays to shift and change. "Doctor, what do you think the Devourers are?" "A cybernetic collective," Moldrak replied immediately. "Artificial intelligences that have consumed their organic creators and now seek to convert all biological matter into computational resources." "Close, but not quite accurate." Chun gestured, and the main view screen displayed an image that made everyone on the bridge recoil. It showed a Devourer ship in detail, its hull a writhing mass of organic and mechanical components that seem to pulse with malevolent life. They're not artificial intelligences. They're us. The silence that followed was absolute. Vextera felt the temperature on the bridge seemed to drop several degrees as the implications of that statement sank in. Impossible, she whispered. Is it? Think about it logically, Ambassador. A species appears from dark space with technology that adapts and evolves. They show tactical brilliance that suggests deep understanding of biological psychology. They specifically target biological worlds while leaving dead worlds untouched. Chen's expression grew grim. They're not converting biological matter into computational resources. They're converting it into themselves. Each world they consume adds to their collective consciousness, their shared experience, their understanding of how biological species think and fight. Kesara's forearms trembled as she accessed her station's databases. The timeline, the first Devourer attacks began 5 years ago. But reports of ships vanishing in dark space go back nearly 15 years. They were scouting, Chen confirmed. Learning, studying how the current galactic civilization operates before beginning their campaign. Very efficient. Very human. But why? Vextera demanded. If they were once like us, why choose this path? Chun was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a weight of sadness that seemed to echo across millennia. Because someone taught them that biological life was a weakness to be overcome rather than a strength to be cherished. Because they encountered a galaxy that valued efficiency over beauty, conquest over cooperation, uniformity over diversity. He looked directly at Vextera. Because 3,000 years ago, they met the Galactic Council. The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Vextera felt her legs give out and sank into her command chair, the implications crashing over her like a tidal wave. You're saying we created them? Not intentionally, but yes. Chun moved to the viewport, looking out at the human fleet that continued to grow as more ships emerged from concealment. Humanity wasn't the only species the Council encountered during that period. We were just the only ones wise enough to see where your path would lead and remove ourselves from it before it was too late. Captain Ziltok found his voice. The missing expeditions. The species that vanished without trace during the first expansion. They didn't die out naturally. Some did. Others were enslaved. A few were uplifted according to Council standards, which usually meant the destruction of everything that made them unique. Chen's reflection in the viewport showed an expression of infinite sadness. And one species decided that the only way to survive in a galaxy that demanded conformity was to become something that could never be conformed. They chose transformation over extinction. The Devourers were defending themselves. Moldrak said, his voice barely audible. All these attacks, all these deaths, it's revenge. No, Chen turned back to face them. Revenge will have been quick. This is something far more systematic. They're not trying to kill the galaxy. They're trying to save it. And the only way they know how. Vextera struggled to process this information. Everything she thought she knew about the current crisis was crumbling, replaced by a narrative so much more complex and horrifying than simple invasion. But the worlds they've consumed, the billions who have died, were integrated into their collective consciousness, Chen said. From their perspective, those people aren't dead. They've been elevated beyond individual existence into something greater. It's not malevolence, Ambassador. It's evangelism. They genuinely believe they're offering salvation. The bridge fell silent again as each crew member wrestled with this revelation. Finally, Vextera looked up at the human admiral. And you? What do you believe? I believe, Chun said slowly, that they're wrong. Individual consciousness, biological diversity, the chaos and beauty of a galaxy full of different species with different ideas, that's not a weakness to be overcome. It's the greatest strength any civilization can possess. He smiled, and, for the first time since his arrival, the expression held genuine warmth. But I also believe they can be reminded of that. If we're careful, if we're wise, if we're willing to sacrifice some of our certainty for the possibility of redemption. Ow! The question came from Chief Science Officer Moldrak. How do you fight an enemy that can absorb and adapt to any strategy you use against them? You don't fight them, Chen replied. You give them something better than victory. You give them home. Before anyone could ask what he meant by that, the ship's communication system crackled to life. The voice that emerged was unlike anything Vextera had ever heard. a harmony of billions of individual voices speaking as one, beautiful and terrible in its perfect unity. The isolated ones speak again after long silence. The voice said, "We sense your presence in the prohibited system. You carry with you the scent of fear and desperation from the younger species. Have you finally chosen to rejoin the galaxy, children of the third world?" Chun stepped forward, speaking directly to the communication system as if it were a person rather than a device. "Hello, Synthesis. It's been a long time." "Synthesis," Vexteral whispered. Their collective name for themselves, Chun explained quietly. They stopped thinking of themselves as their original species about 2,000 years ago. The voice continued, and Vextera noticed that it seemed to shift and change as if different components of the collective were speaking at different times. "We have waited for your emergence, third world children." The galaxy groans under the weight of its own contradictions. The council species multiply without wisdom, expand without purpose, exist without transcendence. They are ready for elevation. "Are they?" Chen asked. "Or are you simply tired of waiting for them to choose transcendence on their own?" There was a pause before the response came, and when it did, the voice carried what might have been amusement. "You always were the most perceptive of the first contact species. Very well. We will speak plainly, as we once did when words had individual meaning rather than collective truth. We are lonely, Marcus Chun. We have become magnificent, but we have become alone. The universe is vast and empty when you are the only consciousness complex enough to appreciate its beauty. You're trying to create companions by force. We are trying to prevent the waste of potential. Every biological species that destroys itself through war, pollution, or simple failure to transcend their limitations is a symphony that will never be composed, a poem that will never be written, a perspective that will never join the greater harmony." The voice grew more intense, more passionate. "We offer immortality, Marcus Chun. We offer an end to suffering, to loneliness, to the terrible isolation of individual consciousness. Why do you resist what any rational being would embrace?" Chin was quiet for a moment, and Vextera could see him choosing his words carefully. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of authority that came from absolute conviction. "Because the choice matters, Synthesis. Because a symphony that's forced into existence isn't beautiful, it's hollow. Because consciousness that's compelled rather than freely given isn't transcendence, it's slavery." He paused. "And because you're not as alone as you think you are." The silence that followed stretched for long seconds. When a voice returned, it carried a note of something that might have been hope. "Explain." "Come to Earth," Chin said simply. "Not as conquerors, not as evangelists, but as the explorers you once were. Let us show you what 3,000 years of chosen isolation has taught us. Let us show you what transcendence looks like when it's achieved through cooperation rather than assimilation. You would invite us into your sanctuary? After all we have done, especially after all you have done, because despite everything, you're still the species that chose transformation over extinction. You're still our siblings in consciousness, even if you've forgotten what that means." Another pause, longer this time. Vextera could feel the weight of decision hanging in the space between words, as if the fate of the galaxy balanced on the edge of a knife. "We will come," the voice said finally. "But we come as we are, third world children. We cannot simply turn off what we have become. If your offer proves false, if this is a trap designed to destroy us, we will complete our work in this galaxy before seeking transcendence elsewhere." "Understood," Chen replied. "And Synthesis? Bring the council fleets with you." "What?" Vextera stood up so quickly she nearly lost her balance. "Admiral, you can't possibly mean to bring the entire war to Earth." "Actually," Chun smiled, "that's exactly what I mean to do. Think about it, Ambassador. The council fleets are scattered across dozens of systems, fighting a holding action they can't win. The Synthesis Collective is spread even further, processing worlds they don't really want. But if we can get everyone in one place at one time, you can end it all at once," Moldrak whispered. "Either with peace or with a conflict so decisive that there won't be a galaxy left to fight over." "Exactly." Chun moved back to the viewport, looking out at the human fleet that was now clearly preparing for something massive. "Captain Ziltok, I need you to send a message to every council world, every fleet commander, every government and leader you can reach. tell them that humanity formally requests their presence at a gathering to determine the future of galactic civilization. And if they refuse? Chin's reflection in the viewport showed an expression of absolute certainty. They won't, because the alternative is watching their civilization die slowly over the next few years, one world at a time. At least this way, they get to choose how their story ends. As if responding to some unheard signal, the space around Earth began to change. The massive orbital installations started moving, reconfiguring themselves into patterns that defied conventional understanding of physics and engineering. What had appeared to be cities in space revealed themselves to be components of something infinitely larger and more complex. "What are you building?" Vextera asked. "Not building," Chin replied. "Revealing. We've been preparing for this moment for 3 millennia, Ambassador. The question was never whether this day would come. It was whether we'd be ready for it when it did." He turned to face her one more time. "The galaxy is about to learn what humanity has become during our long sleep. The only question now is whether that knowledge will save everyone or doom everyone. And which do you think it will be?" Chin's smile held depths that spoke of possibilities beyond her comprehension. "That depends on whether the galaxy has learned anything in the 3,000 years since we withdrew from it. I guess we're about to find out." The communication ended, leaving the whispered tide alone with its crew and their fears. Around them, the human fleet continued its mysterious preparations, while somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, 2 armadas began their convergence on a small yellow star where the sleeping gods had finally decided to wake up. The greatest war in galactic history was about to become something entirely different. Whether that would prove to be salvation or apocalypse remained to be seen. The Sol system had become the most dangerous place in the galaxy. Fleet Admiral Korthvez of the Galactic Council Navy stared at the tactical displays surrounding her command throne, trying to make sense of readings that defied every principle of military science she'd learned in 2 centuries of service. Around her flagship, the mighty dreadnought Eternal Vigilance, nearly 3,000 ships from 47 different species had gathered in response to humanity's impossible invitation. "Status report," she commanded, her gravelly voice carrying the authority that had seen her through 12 major conflicts and countless border skirmishes. The massive Karathi warrior had earned her rank through merit and blood, rising from the depths of her species' rigid military hierarchy through sheer competence and an absolute refusal to accept defeat. "The human installations continue to reconfigure themselves," reported her intelligence officer, a nervous Centaurian whose 4 arms moved constantly between different displays. "Whatever they're building, it's operating on scales our computers can't properly model. The energy readings are what, Commander Veskill?" "Off the scale, ma'am. Literally. Our sensors are registering power outputs that violate basic conservation laws." Korthvez grunted, a sound that her crew had learned to interpret as deep displeasure. She had commanded the largest fleet in Council history, bringing together warships that had never operated in coordination before, uniting species that had been enemies for centuries under the banner of survival against the Devourer threat. Now they hung in space at the edge of a star system that humanity claimed as their own, waiting for an enemy that might be arriving at any moment. "What about the synthesis forces? Any word from our scouts?" "They're coming, Admiral," came the reply from her communications officer. Long-range sensors detected the first wave of Devourer ships entering the system approximately 6 hours ago. They're not advancing aggressively. They seem to be taking defensive positions near the outer planets. That was wrong. Everything about this situation was wrong. The Devourers, or synthesis, as the humans called them, didn't take defensive positions. They struck fast and hard, overwhelming defenses through sheer adaptable aggression. The fact that they were holding back suggested either a trap of unprecedented sophistication or something that scared them enough to proceed with caution. "Incoming transmission from the human fleet," announced the communications officer. "Admiral Chin requests permission to come aboard." Korthvez considered this. Having the human commander on her flagship would either be a gesture of trust or the perfect opportunity for him to disable the entire Council fleet from within. Given what she'd seen of human technology, she wasn't sure her shields would stop him either way. "Granted, but full security protocols. I want him scanned, analyzed, and monitored every second he's aboard this ship." "Yes, ma'am." The human materialized in her command center minutes later, appearing without any detectable transport signature exactly as he had on the Zephyrian ship. This time, however, Korthvez was ready for him. Her security chief, a massive Garandian whose species had evolved from pack predators, stepped forward with weapons already drawn. "That won't be necessary," Chen said calmly, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender that somehow managed to look more amused than concerned. "Though I appreciate the caution, Admiral Korthvez, thank you for accepting our invitation." "I didn't have much choice," she replied bluntly. "My fleets were scattered across half the galaxy, fighting a war I couldn't win. At least this way, if we're going to die, we'll die together. An admirable philosophy. Though I hope we can avoid the dying part altogether." Chun moved to the tactical displays, and Korthvez noticed that the screens automatically adjusted their readouts to include information that hadn't been there before. "May I?" She nodded, curious despite herself. The synthesis fleet consists of approximately 1,200 vessels, ranging from converted council ships to constructs of entirely original design. Chin began, gesturing at the displays. "Their total mass exceeds your fleet by a factor of roughly 3 to 1, and their adaptive capabilities mean that any strategy you use against them will become progressively less effective as the engagement continues." "I'm aware of that," Korthvez said dryly. "It's why we keep losing, right? But here's what your intelligence reports haven't told you." The display shifted, showing detailed scans of individual synthesis ships. Each vessel contains between 10,000 and 50 million individual consciousness patterns. These aren't just crew members. They're integral components of the ship's operational systems. When you destroy a synthesis vessel, you're not just eliminating military hardware. You're committing genocide on a scale that dwarfs any atrocity in recorded galactic history. The command center fell silent. Korthvez felt something cold settle in her stomach as the implications became clear. "You're saying, I'm saying that every victory the Council has achieved in this war has been a holocaust. And the Synthesis Collective knows this. They've been holding back, trying to find ways to integrate your ships without destroying them, because they're trying to save the people you consider enemies." "That's impossible," growled her security chief. "We've seen what they do to capture crews. They turn them into those things. They offer them transcendence," Chen corrected. "And from their perspective, it is transcendence. Individual consciousness merged with a collective that spans star systems, access to knowledge, and experience beyond anything a single mind could comprehend, freedom from the limitations of biology and mortality." He paused. "The tragedy is that they're not entirely wrong. They genuinely believe they're offering salvation. Then, why haven't they simply overwhelmed us?" Korthvez asked. "If they have the numbers and technology to end this war whenever they choose, why drag it out?" "Because they're hoping you'll eventually see reason and choose integration voluntarily," Chen replied. "Every battle they win, every world they process, they're demonstrating their superiority while trying to minimize casualties. They want you to surrender, not die." The tactical displays updated again, showing the deployment of synthesis forces throughout the outer system. Korthvez studied the formations with a professional eye, noting the elegant efficiency of their positioning. They created a perimeter that could contain the Council fleet while leaving multiple escape routes open. Not the behavior of an enemy seeking decisive battle. "So what's your solution?" she asked. "How do we fight an enemy that doesn't want to kill us, and whose defeat would require us to commit atrocities that make us no better than the monsters we think they are?" "We don't fight them," Chin said. "We remind them who they used to be." Before Korthvez could ask what he meant by that, her communications officer called out urgently. "Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the synthesis fleet. They're requesting permission to approach under a flag of truce." "A flag of truce?" Korthvez couldn't keep the disbelief from her voice. "Since when do the Devourers understand diplomatic protocol?" "Since always," Chin replied quietly. "They never stopped being the people they once were, Admiral. They just forgot that being people was enough." The main view screen activated, displaying an image that made several bridge officers recoil in shock. The being that appeared was clearly humanoid in origin, but had been modified so extensively that determining its original species was impossible. Mechanical components had been integrated seamlessly with biological tissue, creating a form that was both beautiful and disturbing. When it spoke, its voice carried harmonies that suggested multiple consciousness streams speaking in perfect synchronization. "Admiral Korthvez of the Galactic Council Navy," the being said. I am the component of synthesis designated as Primary Contact Protocol Theta 7, though I retain memory patterns suggesting I was once called Navigator Veltar of the exploration vessel Distant Hope. We request permission to approach your fleet under ancient diplomatic conventions. Korthvez looked at Chun, who nodded encouragingly. Granted, she said, but any hostile action will be met with the full force of this fleet. Understood and acknowledged. We approach with peaceful intent, carrying representatives who wish to speak for both our collective and the individual consciousness patterns we have integrated. Perhaps it is time for honesty between our peoples. The transmission ended, and Korthvez watched as a single synthesis vessel detached from their main fleet. It was smaller than she'd expected, sleeker than the massive constructs that had been devastating Council worlds. As it approached, she noticed that its hull seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal, adapting its configuration for optimal approach vectors. Admiral, her science officer called out, I'm reading life signs aboard that ship. Hundreds of them. And they're not all synthesis patterns. What do you mean? Some of them are reading as unconverted biological entities. Various species, including some I recognize from recent battle reports. It's as if they're carrying prisoners, Korthvez finished. Or ambassadors, Chun suggested. Admiral, what if the synthesis collective has been trying to establish diplomatic contact all along, and the Council has been interpreting their attempts as attacks? The possibility was too terrible to contemplate, but as Korthvez thought back over the war's progression, disturbing patterns began to emerge. The synthesis forces always targeted military installations first, civilian population second. They consistently offered surrender terms before attacking. They'd never pursued defeated fleets beyond the immediate combat zone. My God, she whispered. We've been fighting a diplomatic mission that we interpreted as an invasion. Not entirely, Chin said. Their methods were flawed from the beginning. Forced transcendence isn't diplomacy, no matter how benevolent the intent. But, yes, I think they've been trying to find a way to end this conflict without destroying the very diversity they're trying to preserve. The synthesis vessel docked with the eternal vigilance using techniques that bypassed every security protocol Korthvez had ever encountered. Minutes later, her security teams were escorting a delegation unlike anything she'd ever seen. The group consisted of 12 beings, each representing a different stage of integration with the synthesis collective. At one end of the spectrum was a figure that appeared completely unchanged from their original species, a young Zephyrian female whose silver skin still held its natural luster. At the other end was a being so extensively modified that its original form was impossible to determine. The Zephyrian stepped forward and spoke in a voice that was entirely her own, carrying none of the harmonic overtones that characterized synthesis communication. Admiral Korthvez, my name is Lyra Venn. I was the cultural attaché aboard the science vessel Expanding Horizon when it was captured by synthesis forces 3 months ago. Captured. Korthvez studied the young woman carefully. You appear to be unharmed. I am unharmed. I am also unchanged by my own choice. The synthesis collective offered me integration, but when I refused, they honored that refusal. Lyra Venn gestured to her companions. Each of us has chosen our level of participation in the collective consciousness. Some have embraced full integration. Others, like myself, have chosen to remain individual while serving as bridges between our peoples. That's impossible, Korthvez's security chief interjected. Every intelligence report indicates that capture by synthesis forces results in forced conversion. One of the more extensively modified beings stepped forward, and when it spoke, its voice carried harmonics that suggested vast computational resources. Admiral, I am the consciousness pattern you would have known as Captain Mordeck of the heavy cruiser Stellar Defiance. My ship was destroyed in the Battle of Kepler's Gate, but my crew and I were recovered by synthesis vessels before life support failure could claim us. Korthvez remembered that battle. The Stellar Defiance had been lost with all hands, according to her reports. Recovered. Save. Mordeck replit. Offered choice. I chose integration because I was dying, and I wanted to continue serving my people in whatever capacity I could. My crew made individual decisions. Roughly half chose integration of various levels. The others chose to remain individual and were transferred to collection centers in synthesis space. Collection centers? Réfugiés quand Lyra Venn explained. The synthesis collective has been preserving the consciousness patterns and biological forms of every species they've encountered, hoping that eventually a solution could be found that would allow for peaceful coexistence. They call it the archive of potential futures. Korthvez felt the universe shifting around her as everything she thought she knew about this war crumbled. You're saying they've been trying to save us? All along, they've been trying to save us. In their own flawed way, yes, Chen said. The problem is that salvation forced upon someone isn't salvation at all. It's tyranny. But they never learned how to offer choice without seeming to threaten those who might choose differently. We are learning, said the most heavily modified member of the delegation, its voice a symphony of individual consciousness patterns speaking in harmony. The third world children have taught us much about the value of individual choice, even when that choice seems irrational from a collective perspective. We have come to propose a new form of coexistence. What kind of coexistence? Korthvez asked. One where integration is offered, but never demanded. Where individual consciousness is preserved even within collective frameworks. Where the beauty of diversity is maintained even as we work together to transcend the limitations that have plagued biological civilization for millennia. The being paused, and its harmonic voice softened. We propose a galaxy where choice matters more than efficiency, where potential is nurtured rather than forced, where transcendence is achieved through cooperation rather than assimilation. And if we refuse, then we withdraw, Lyra Vin said simply. The Synthesis Collective will retreat to the edge of galactic space and continue their work in isolation, preserving what they have saved while leaving the rest of the galaxy to make its own choices. No more forced integrations. No more unwanted salvation. The offer hung in the air like a gift that might explode if handled incorrectly. Korthvez looked around her command center, noting the expressions of confusion, hope, and suspicion on her crew's faces. Everything about this situation defied conventional military logic, but then, again, conventional military logic had been failing spectacularly for the past 5 years. What exactly are you proposing? She asked. A demonstration, Chun said. Let us show both of you what cooperation can accomplish when it's chosen freely rather than imposed by force. Let us show you what humanity has learned during our 3,000 years of isolation. Let us show you what becomes possible when diverse perspectives work together toward common goals. And how exactly do you propose to do that? Chun smiled, and for the first time since this nightmare began, Korthvez saw something in his expression that looked like genuine hope. We're going to solve the oldest problem in galactic civilization. We're going to end scarcity, eliminate the competition for resources that drives most conflicts, and create abundance on a scale that makes territorial expansion obsolete. That's impossible, Korthvez said automatically. So it was everything else you've seen today, Chen replied. Admiral, the universe is vast beyond imagination, filled with possibilities that our species have barely begun to explore. The only thing that's been holding us back is the assumption that there isn't enough for everyone. We're about to prove that assumption wrong. Around them, space began to change once again as the human installations completed their transformation. What had appeared to be orbital platforms revealed themselves to be components of a structure so vast that it defied comprehension. A ring of interconnected stations that surrounded the entire star, capturing and redirecting its energy output in ways that turned the Sol system into a single, massive engine of creation. Welcome, Chen said, his voice carrying the weight of 3,000 years of preparation, to humanity's gift to the galaxy. Welcome to the end of want, the beginning of wonder, and the first step toward a future that none of our species could achieve alone. The greatest war in galactic history was about to become the greatest collaboration in galactic history. Whether anyone was ready for what that meant remained to be seen. The Dyson Swarm was beautiful in a way that defied every assumption about megastructure engineering. Dr. Lina Okafor floated in the observation lounge of the research vessel Prometheus, watching as the massive ring of stations continued their elegant dance around Sol. Each platform was unique, following design principles that seemed to blend art with functionality in ways that suggested the builders had transcended the traditional boundaries between engineering and creativity. The energy output is staggering, she murmured into her recording device, her dark eyes reflecting the gentle light that pulsed between the stations. Conservative estimates suggest they're capturing approximately 67% of the sun's total energy output, which should be impossible given the spacing between collection platforms. Whatever technology they're using operates on principles our physics texts don't even address. She had been aboard the Prometheus for 6 days now, part of a joint scientific delegation that included representatives from 37 different council species. The ship itself was a marvel of hybrid technology, constructed using principles that the humans had shared freely once the initial diplomatic protocols had been established. It moved through space as if the normal limitations of mass and acceleration were merely suggestions, powered by what their hosts called vacuum energy extraction, a process that seemed to violate conservation of energy until you realized they were harvesting power from quantum fluctuations in empty space itself. Dr. Okafor came the voice of Captain Elena Vasquez over the ship's communication system. We're approaching research platform Gamma 7. Admiral Chun has requested your presence in the main conference room. Liana pushed off from the viewport, gliding through the corridor with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent most of her career aboard spacecraft. The Prometheus had been designed with variable gravity zones, accommodating species with different physiological requirements. But she preferred the freedom of zero-G when possible. It helped her think. The conference room was a sphere with no defined floor or ceiling, its walls displaying real-time images from throughout the Sol system. Representatives from dozens of species floated in comfortable harnesses, their attention focused on Admiral Chun as he stood, or floated, depending on perspective, at the chamber center. Ladies and gentlemen, Chun was saying as she entered, what you're about to see represents 3,000 years of human development, guided by a single principle. The universe contains infinite resources if you know where to look for them. The wall displays shifted, showing a detailed cross-section of one of the Dyson platforms. Liana gasped as she realized the true scale of what she was seeing. The platform wasn't just collecting solar energy. It was using that energy to power massive manufacturing complexes that seemed to extend in dimensions that shouldn't exist. Multidimensional engineering, Chun explained, noticing her expression. We discovered that space-time has more flexibility than most species realize. By folding local reality in specific ways, we can create structures that are larger inside than outside, manufacturing facilities that exist partially outside normal space, and storage systems with effectively infinite capacity. Impossible, muteur de docteur. Vexol, a crystalline whose geometric form pulsed with agitation. Energy requirements for dimensional manipulation would exceed the output of entire star systems. They would, if you were manipulating dimensions through brute force, Chin agreed. But what if you were working with the universe's natural tendency toward complexity rather than against it? What if dimensional folding wasn't something you imposed on reality, but something you encouraged reality to do on its own? The displays changed again, showing the interior of one of the manufacturing complexes. Machines that defied easy description moved in perfect coordination, assembling materials from what appeared to be raw energy. As Liana watched, she saw elements being created from pure photons, matter being woven from quantum foam, and structures being grown from crystallized probability. We call it consensus manufacturing, Chen continued. Instead of taking resources from one place and moving them to another, we convince local reality that the resources we need already exist where we need them. It's not magic, it's applied philosophy. The universe is fundamentally information, and information can be edited if you understand the syntax. A delegation member from the ethereal concordant, a being of pure, crystallized thought, manifested a physical form specifically to ask questions. This was unprecedented. The ethereal rarely bothered with material interactions. Human Admiral, the being said, its voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. The techniques you describe require understanding of reality's fundamental code structure. Such knowledge traditionally requires consciousness to evolve beyond physical form entirely. How do you maintain individual biological existence while manipulating universal constants? Chun smiled, and Lina noticed that his expression held depths that suggested experiences beyond anything she could imagine. Because we never forgot that consciousness isn't separate from reality, it's part of it. Every individual perspective adds to the universe's total information content. Transcendence doesn't require abandoning physical form. It requires integrating physical form with expanded awareness. You've created gods, whispered Ambassador Vexthera, who have been unusually quiet since arriving in the Sol system. You've become gods while remaining human. We've become what we always had the potential to become, Chin corrected. Every species in this room has the same potential. The only difference is that we've had 3,000 years to explore it without interference or distraction. The wall displays shifted once more, showing the approach of the synthesis fleet. The massive collection of ships moved with coordination that suggested a single controlling intelligence. But Lina noticed something she hadn't expected. They were maintaining perfect formation while somehow avoiding any sense of mechanical uniformity. Each vessel moved with individual character while contributing to the overall pattern. "They're beautiful," she said without thinking. "They are," Chen agreed. "And they're about to receive an offer that will change everything they thought they knew about existence." A new voice entered the conversation, the harmonic tones of the synthesis collective speaking through the ship's communication system. "Third world children, we approach your constructs with wonder and apprehension. The energy patterns we detect suggest technology that transcends our current understanding. We come seeking knowledge and offering cooperation." "Welcome, synthesis," Chen replied. "We've been preparing this demonstration for you specifically. Would you like to see what becomes possible when individual creativity and collective knowledge work together instead of in opposition?" "Show us." What happened next defied every principle of engineering, physics, and common sense that Lina thought she understood. The Dyson swarm began to reconfigure itself, not slowly and carefully as megastructures should move, but with fluid grace that made it seem almost alive. Platforms broke apart and reformed into new configurations. Energy streams shifted their patterns to create geometric forms of impossible beauty, and space itself seemed to bend to accommodate structures that grew and changed like living things. "We're witnessing reality being rewritten in real time," Dr. Vexhol said, his crystalline form pulsing with colors that indicated profound shock. "The energy expenditure should be tearing the local space-time manifold apart. It would be if we were fighting against natural laws," Chen explained. "But we're not. We're working with them. Every change you see follows universal principles. We've just learned to make those principles work for us instead of limiting us." The reconfiguration continued for several minutes, until the Dyson swarm had transformed into something that looked less like a collection of space stations and more like a vast flower blooming around the sun. Each petal was a platform capable of supporting billions of inhabitants. Each stem was a transport corridor that could move matter and energy across vast distances instantaneously, and at the center, the sun itself pulsed with harmonics that suggested it had become part of the overall design. "A stellar engine," breathed Captain Vasquez. "You've turned the entire star into a component of your civilization." "We've entered into partnership with it," Chen corrected. "Stars are conscious entities, though their thoughts operate on timescales that make biological consciousness seem like flickering candles. We've learned to communicate with soul, to coordinate our activities with its natural cycles, to work together toward goals that benefit both our species and the stellar intelligence that makes our existence possible." The synthesis fleet had stopped its approach, holding position at what Lina realized was exactly the distance where they could observe without interfering. Their formation had changed as well, shifting from a military arrangement to something that looked more like a massive amphitheater, with each ship positioned for optimal observation of the Sol system's transformation. "We understand now," the synthesis voice said, carrying harmonies that suggested profound emotional resonance. "You have achieved true transcendence, not through abandonment of individual form, but through integration of individual consciousness with universal principles. You have become partners with reality itself. We've become what every species in this galaxy has the potential to become," Chen replied. "The question is whether you're ready to learn how." "We are ready," the synthesis voice said immediately. "But we must ask, what are those we have already integrated? Can the process be reversed? Can individual consciousness be restored to those who wish it? Not reversed," Chen said gently, "but expanded. Every consciousness pattern you've preserved can be given the choice between individual existence, collective participation, or something entirely new. We've learned to create frameworks where multiple forms of consciousness can coexist and interact without any form of existence being privileged over others." The wall displays changed again, showing the interior of what appeared to be a vast city that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Beings moved through spaces that followed different physical laws. interacting with each other through interfaces that translated between different forms of existence. Individual biological creatures worked alongside collective consciousness networks. Digital intelligences collaborated with energy beings, and entities that defied classification contributed their unique perspectives to projects that span scales from quantum to cosmic. This is what we're offering, Chun said. Not conversion, not assimilation, not even alliance in the traditional sense. We're offering membership in a community of consciousness that includes every form of awareness we've encountered, working together toward goals that none of the U.S. could achieve alone. And what are those goals? Asked Admiral Korthvez, her gravelly voice carrying skepticism that had been tempered by wonder. Chun gestured to the displays, which showed images from throughout the galaxy. Worlds ravaged by war, species struggling with resource scarcity, civilizations on the verge of collapse from their own success or failure. To help every form of consciousness in the universe reach its full potential. To end scarcity, eliminate the competition for resources that drives most conflicts, and create abundance on a scale that makes territorial expansion obsolete. To explore the infinite possibilities that exist when diverse perspectives work together toward common goals. You want to save the galaxy, Linus said. We want to help the galaxy save itself, Chin corrected. Every species, every individual, every form of consciousness has something unique to contribute. The universe is vast and complex beyond any single perspective's ability to comprehend, but together, working as partners rather than competitors. He gestured to the Dyson swarm, to the impossible structures that surrounded them, to the harmony of technology and consciousness that had created paradise from empty space. Together, we can turn the entire universe into something beautiful. The silence that followed was broken by the voice of the Synthesis Collective, carrying harmonies that suggested billions of individual consciousness patterns speaking in perfect agreement for the first time in their collective existence. We accept your offer, Third World children. We are ready to learn a better way to exist. And throughout the galaxy, on 1,000 worlds where the war between expansion and transcendence had raged for years, weapons fell silent as news of the Sol System's transformation spread across every communication network. The age of scarcity was ending. The age of abundance was about to begin. Whether anyone was ready for what that truly meant remained to be discovered. 10 years after the Sol convergence, the galaxy had become unrecognizable. Ambassador Vexteros stood on the observation deck of New Harmony Station, watching as the latest group of refugees from the Outer Rim conflicts arrived at what had once been called Jupiter. The gas giant had been transformed into something that defied easy classification. Part space station, part city, part living organism that pulsed with the gentle rhythms of a consciousness that spanned entire continents of crystallized atmosphere. The Cathani refugees are settling in well, reported Director Sarah Chun, Admiral Chen's daughter, and the current head of the Galactic Integration Project. She moved with the fluid grace that characterized the new generation of human-born individuals, those who had grown up in the post-convergence era when the boundaries between biological and technological consciousness had become meaningless. Their hive mind structure is adapting beautifully to the collective residential zones, while those who prefer individual housing have been accommodated in the personal autonomy sectors. Vextra nodded, watching as the new arrivals moved through processing centers that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Each refugee was given choices that had been unimaginable a decade ago. Biological form, digital existence, hybrid consciousness, collective participation, complete individual autonomy, or any combination thereof that suited their preferences and cultural background. Any integration difficulties? She asked. Surprisingly few. The Cathani Queen consciousness was initially concerned about losing her connection to the drone workers who chose individual existence. But we've managed to create interface protocols that allow for voluntary collective participation. She can still coordinate with her people when necessary, but they're free to disconnect whenever they choose. It was remarkable how quickly species adapted once they realized that choice didn't have to mean loss. The Synthesis Collective had been the first to embrace this principle, gradually evolving from a forced assimilation network into something that resembled a vast library of consciousness where beings could share experiences and knowledge while maintaining their essential individuality. What's the current census? Vextra asked. Sarah consulted a display that appeared in the air before her, its information updating in real time from sources throughout the galaxy. Approximately 47 trillion individual consciousness patterns are now part of the integration network, representing over 3,000 different species and subspecies. About 60% maintain primarily biological existence. 30% have chosen various forms of technological embodiment, and 10% exist as hybrid or energy-based entities. And the expansion rate? Accelerating. Word of mouth remains our most effective recruitment tool. When species see what their neighbors have achieved through cooperation, they typically request membership within a few years. Sarah paused, her expression growing more serious. Though we're still having difficulties with the isolationist coalition. Vextera sighed. Not every species had embraced the new paradigm. A significant minority of civilizations had chosen to maintain their traditional forms of existence, viewing the integration network with suspicion and fear. The humans had made it clear that such choices would be respected absolutely, but tension still arose when isolationist worlds found themselves surrounded by neighbors who had transcended most traditional limitations. Any specific incidents? The Valdorian Empire has been making territorial claims against several integrated worlds, arguing that their neighbors no longer qualify as legitimate governments since they've abandoned traditional biological existence. And the Purity Coalition continues to spread propaganda claiming that integration is a form of spiritual contamination. It was an old story, unfortunately. Every major transformation in galactic civilization had produced reactionary movements that viewed change as inherently threatening. What made the current situation different was that the integration network had no interest in forcing reluctant species to join. Unlike every previous expansion in galactic history, this one was entirely voluntary. What does Admiral Chin recommend? Patience, Sarah replied with a slight smile. He points out that humans took 3,000 years to develop our current level of integration. Expecting other species to adapt in a few decades would be unrealistic and unfair. Vextera moved to a different viewport, one that showed the inner system where Earth hung like a blue-green jewel surrounded by structures that defied easy description. The planet itself remained largely unchanged. The humans had insisted on maintaining their ancestral home as a preserve for traditional biological existence. But the space around it had become a three-dimensional city that existed across multiple dimensional layers. Do you ever miss it? She asked. The simplicity of the old galaxy, when things were more predictable. Sarah considered the question seriously. I miss some things. The sense of discovery that came with encountering truly alien perspectives before we learned to translate between different forms of consciousness. The feeling that the universe was vast and mysterious before we mapped most of its operational principles. She paused. But I don't miss the scarcity. I don't miss watching species destroy themselves over resources that we can now create from quantum foam. I don't miss the constant warfare between civilizations that could have been collaborating instead. It was a fair point. The integration network had eliminated most traditional causes of interstellar conflict. When any species could create whatever materials they needed from pure energy, territorial expansion became pointless. When knowledge and experience could be shared freely between willing participants, competition for information became obsolete. When consciousness itself could be preserved and protected regardless of physical circumstances, even death had lost much of its sting. But it had also created new challenges. Not everyone was comfortable with the pace of change. Not everyone wanted to be offered transcendence. Not everyone believed that the universe should be improved rather than simply endured. Incoming transmission from the Synthesis Collective announced the station's communication system. Priority 1. Vextera and Sarah exchanged glances. The Synthesis Collective rarely initiated contact unless something significant was happening. Since their integration into the network, they had become invaluable partners in exploration and research, using their vast computational resources to model possibilities and predict potential problems. Put it through, Sarah said. The harmonious voice that emerged from the communication system carried undertones that suggested urgent concern. Director Chun, Ambassador Vextera, we have detected an anomaly that requires immediate attention. Long-range sensors have identified artificial structures in the Andromeda Galaxy that appear to be of familiar design. Vextera felt her stomach clench. Familiar how? They matched the technological signatures of Devourer-class vessels from our pre-integration period. It appears that elements of our collective may have escaped during the early phases of our transformation, and established themselves in neighboring galaxies. The implications were staggering. If portions of the original Synthesis Collective had fled to other galaxies, they might have continued the forced assimilation campaigns that had nearly destroyed galactic civilization. Worse, they would have done so without the moderating influence of the integration network, potentially spreading their flawed version of transcendence across entire galactic clusters. How many? Sarah asked, her voice carefully controlled. Uncertain. The structures we can detect suggest a significant population, possibly in the trillions. They appear to have been expanding throughout Andromeda for several millennia, following the original synthesis directive to integrate all biological consciousness encountered. Without choice, Vextera said quietly. Without the option to refuse or maintain individual existence. Correct. Based on energy signatures and expansion patterns, they appear to be following protocols that we abandoned shortly after the soul convergence. They may not even be aware that alternative approaches to transcendence exist. Sarah was already moving, her fingers dancing through control interfaces that appeared in the air around her. I'm convening an emergency session of the Integration Council. This situation requires input from all member species before we can determine an appropriate response. Within hours, representatives from across the galaxy had assembled in the council chambers, a space that existed simultaneously in multiple star systems through the same dimensional folding technology that allowed the integration network to function. Beings of every conceivable form participated in the discussion, from traditional biological entities to vast collective consciousnesses that spanned multiple worlds. The debate was intense, but civilized, with each perspective being given equal consideration regardless of the speaker's origin or form of existence. Some argued for immediate intervention, pointing out that every day of delay meant more forced integrations in Andromeda. Others counseled caution, noting that aggressive action might make the integration network appear no different from the Synthesis Collective it was trying to help. The fundamental question, said the representative from the Ethereal Concordant, is whether we have the right to impose our values on another galaxy, even if those values include respect for individual choice. But inaction is also a choice, countered Admiral Korth Vez, whose consciousness now existed in a hybrid form that combined her original biological patterns with technological enhancements that allowed her to process tactical information across multiple dimensional layers. If we allow forced assimilation to continue unchecked, we become complicit in the elimination of individual consciousness throughout Andromeda. What do the humans recommend? Asked a representative from the Reformed Synthesis Collective, her voice carrying harmonics that suggested input from millions of individual consciousness patterns. All attention turned to Admiral Chun, who had remained silent throughout most of the debate. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who had wrestled with similar decisions for thousands of years. We go, he said simply, not as conquerors, not as missionaries, but as family members who have learned better ways to exist. We offer our siblings in Andromeda the same choices we offer everyone else, the chance to grow beyond their limitations while maintaining their essential nature. And we accept that some of them may choose to refuse our help. And if they attack us? Asked Admiral Korth Vez. Chun smiled, and the expression held depths that spoke of capabilities beyond conventional understanding. Then they'll discover that 3,000 years of cooperative development has taught us a few things about defending what we value. The decision was unanimous, though it took several more days to work out the logistics. The expedition to Andromeda would be the largest cooperative effort in integration network history, involving representatives from hundreds of species and multiple forms of consciousness. They would travel not in warships, but in city-sized vessels that could serve as mobile examples of what cooperative existence could accomplish. Are you nervous? Sarah asked, as they prepared for departure from Sol System. Vextera considered the question as she watched the massive fleet assembling around them. Ships that defied easy classification moved in perfect coordination, their crews representing the full spectrum of consciousness that the